Welcome to today's Zoom series on the proposed updates to the City of Yachats Title IX Land Use Code. Today we're focusing on design standards and we're going to highlight aesthetic guidelines, setbacks, and height restrictions. I'm glad to be joined by Lauren Dickinson and Catherine Gunther, who will be sharing their expertise with us. Lauren Dickinson is one of our Planning Commission members, and Catherine Gunther, as you know, is our city planner. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you've been along for the ride throughout our previous sessions, thank you very much for your participation and continued engagement. I do want to give a brief reminder that previous recordings from Zoom sessions are available on the City of Yachats YouTube page. And we're going to stick with the agenda we've put in place for these sessions, with an opening remark from Lauren Dickinson, Planning Commission member. And he's going to talk about the key aspects of design standards, some concepts, and sentiments regarding them. Then we will go into some of the sentiments and questions that were gathered from our July 14th community engagement session, and then open the floor for live questions and conversations from our members joining today. And then we'll wrap it up and I'll let everybody know what our next topic for tomorrow's Zoom is. So welcome again, and I will pass the baton to you, Lauren.
Good. Good afternoon, everybody. The design standards are relatively simple to understand, primarily because they're very graphic in nature. You can look and see a picture that kind of describes each and most of the aspects that are written in design standards. And so if you're interested in one or particular, the other, either the triplex or the fourplex or the clusters housing, it is available in graphic form as well as in words. So it's pretty easy to understand. I think the important things to remember about the design standards is there's four aspects of design standards that are more important in why they were included with this. And one of them is by introducing the design standards is an attempt to try to preserve green space and open space by limiting things like driveway locations and where driveways can occur. So there's a benefit to the visual aspects of some of the guidelines. The second thing that they're intend to do is to promote some individuality for each of the units. In other words, if you look, most of those have individual entrances for each of the units for the various sizes of the complex. The third thing that's important is that they promote articulation of buildings from the street frontages and the public sides by the introduction and guidelines, not only for the recessed entrances, but things like windows. So you don't end up with a blank wall facing a public street. And then the last thing that the guidelines are promoting is and clarifying is the methodology for how things are measured. So each of those are relatively simple to understand. It is important to understand that the guidelines as proposed originally are for triplexes, fourplexes, cluster housing, multifamily type projects like that. And they originally did not include duplexes, and I'll get to that in a moment. But they also have a limitation for projects that are developed with 20 or more units as an exception. A couple of other exceptions that you can read in there too. Originally, duplexes were not included in the design guidelines because primarily Oregon revised statutes requires that if they are then you have to provide similar guidelines for single-family dwelling units. So there has been some discussion uh, publicly and in the public meetings and within the Planning Commission about possibly looking into those. So my understanding is that the guidelines that would apply to single-family dwelling units and duplexes is going to be provided as something to look at. So with that, I think we can open it to any questions that you might have.
Let's see, before we go into questions, would we like to talk a little bit about setbacks? There were some setbacks originally proposed, and we've discussed those already and are going to continue discussing those. Catherine, do you want to weigh in on those?
Sure.
And also let's talk about height also.
Okay, so we'll do setbacks first.
Okay.
Right now, with the exception of the commercial zone, and I'm just gonna leave that out of it because there's so many variables there. But in all of our residential zones, so from R1 through R4, setbacks are identical. Basically, it's 20 feet from the street, it's 10 feet from a rear property line, and side yard setbacks are dependent on the height of a structure. So between 5 to 10 feet, depending on how tall the tallest structure is. So there've been a lot of things batted around. In the current draft, those setbacks are proposed to not really change in the R1 and the R2 zone. There's been some discussion of reducing front yard setbacks to as little as 10 feet in the higher density residential zones. That's still very much in the draft phase. Discussion of reduced setbacks for detached ADUs, keeping in mind though that those would be limited in height to 15 feet. So, for example, if your house was only 15 feet tall, you would be allowed to build to within 5 feet of the side property line. So that's kind of in keeping with our setbacks that are based on building height. All of that is still very much up in the air. I think there'll be a lot of discussion around that in some of the public hearings. And setbacks aren't really the things that constrain most people when it comes to uh, more development on a lot. We have pretty strict lot coverage guidelines. So if you look at the total square footage that you can put on a 50 by 100 or a 75 by 100 lot, that's really what's going to determine how much can be built there. The setbacks will determine where you can slide that 30 to 40% lot coverage around, but it doesn't really allow you to build anymore. Building height, there are no changes proposed to building height. We have a statewide, yeah, now I'm talking about a land grab. We have a citywide building height limit of 30 feet. So that's the maximum under any circumstances. There are some things that are more restrictive. For example, detached structures, a detached garage limited currently to 15 feet. Nothing is being proposed to be taller than 30 feet. Detached structures would still be limited to 15 feet in the current draft. Cottage clusters limited to 24 feet rather than 30 that would be allowed for single dwelling units. So I know there's been a lot of confusion around that and around the impact that that might have on neighborhoods where they have a private deed restriction, a covenant condition and restriction that limits building height to something less than the city's maximum. So really nothing has changed there. At this point, the city doesn't have any authority to influence those if they're more restrictive than the city's maximum. So I hope that helps people somewhat. So we don't see a ton of things that are 30 feet tall, but the possibility has been there in not all, but most of our neighborhoods well, since our code was adopted in 1992. One of the things that is being proposed in the draft is a increase in lot coverage for even single dwelling units. So what we used to refer to as single family residences, with a voluntary reduction in building height from 30 feet to 24 feet, that we might allow a slightly larger lot coverage to allow somebody to get the same square footage, but with a lower building height. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, do you want to talk about the list of items we're going to be reviewing at our next Planning Commission work session? I think that that front yard setback is going to have a lot of conversation. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, maybe not so much so what's been happening during the discussion, the sort of line by line discussion of this, uh, the goal of that was to make sure that everybody understood what our current code said, what was being proposed, and what's different about it. Well, that tended to lead to some kind of heated discussion sometimes about the what's different, or even what's in our current code. So those topics that have led to some really good discussion, um, Bobby has been listing those to then come back once we finish the line by line discussion and say, okay, these are the things that we really should start focusing on. When I say we, I mean the planning commission. I don't get a vote, but I get to kind of help guide that discussion and say these are the things where there's really not consensus. These are the topics that are going to be probably the things where there's the most discussion during deliberation. Setbacks are definitely on there. Been a lot of discussion about duplexes in the R1 zone. I'd say that's another one that is kind of high on that list. Um, Parking, any proposed reduction in parking, and there are very few proposed reductions. It's more that we're adding some new housing types. So whether or not the proposed standards for off-street parking, is that appropriate for a cottage cluster? Um, what else? It's those kinds of things where they
Yeah,
may or may not end up looking at all like they do in the current draft
right.
by the time they go to as a recommendation to council. Um,
Right. And just real quick, you had made reference to, understanding what's in our current code. And I would like for maybe Lauren or you, Catherine, whichever, to expand upon what kind of design standards we have in our current code.
Should we say it together? Zero?
Yeah, there right now Catherine's correct. It's generally zero, other than the standard things that we think about, which is yard setbacks and that kind of thing. But as far as visual standards, no, there are none within our current code.
So I'm going to bring up, everybody's favorite building project because I think it's relevant in this conversation. That was built to code, as is, and the code that we're looking at with these design standards, it would look different. Can you expand upon that?
I think we all know what project we're talking about. Uh, and the answer is correct. Once a building gets to close to maximum height and maximum lot coverage, it's quite common to have a building that is with very little articulation in it. And we've had a few examples of that here. There's one primary one that's been controversial, that the design standards that are being proposed would render that project looking completely different than it does today.
Yeah, maybe just to take, and I've learned a lot from Lauren. So by articulation, he means not having a big flat wall with
Yes.
no
Yeah.
definition.
You'll have to excuse me. I'm a retired
It's
architect,
okay.
so
I'll interpret
so
for
I
you.
use a terminology, but articulation just means basically the easiest way to think about it is ins and outs in the building that provide interest.
And so
Yeah.
maybe you
Setbacks
mentioned
of different
recessed
parts of the
entry.
building, and other parts would be at a different plane that might create interest in the front of the building, shade and shadow and things like that.
The other thing that's I think in all of the proposed design standards is an effort to avoid that all I see are garage doors in
Yes,
the front.
yeah,
So that might have made a difference in the, and we're talking about the project on East Ninth Street, the four townhouses there. And that is one place where parking could have been in the back because access is off of a side street. So there might have been an opportunity there to say, hey, let's do the articulation that
mhm,
Lauren's talking about and move that bank of garage doors to the back of the house and really could make a difference in the appearance without adding anything to the cost. There's just some design choices. It's not even making people use more expensive materials, or it's just giving a little more thought to the look.
Thank you for that. I'm going to give a couple questions that came from the July 14th meeting. One of those is why aren't we considering a 35-foot height limit?
Well, can I talk about my conversation with the fire chief this morning? I
Sure, that's a
told him that I said
great thing.
I'm calling you out because that is one of the reasons that I don't think we will be going any taller anytime sooner. Yeah, fire has no aerial trucks. We have no giant ladder truck. If you were 40 feet up in a building, they couldn't do much but wave at you. So if nothing else, that will sort of put a cap on any crazy ideas about going any taller. The other thing that's happened since Lauren has been on the planning commission, in fact, we worked kind of hard together on this to fine tune our calculation of building
correct,
height.
yeah.
It used to be that if you were on any kind of slope, you'd sort of take the average of the four corners, and that midpoint would be the starting point to calculate your 30 feet. So if you think about some of the steep hillside up here and say the Blackstone subdivision comes to mind, the downhill side on those houses could appear to be 5 stories tall because of that averaging. So a lot of thought has gone into tightening that up so that the effective building height will never be 4 or 5 or 6 stories. Lauren and I've worked a couple of sort of complicated examples in the last couple of years where it's not a nice square building on a nice flat lot. We've got retaining walls and slopes, and it's kind of a game we play. We both work the problem and see if we get the same answer.
Mhm.
So I think we've hit on a pretty good formula for calculation of building height, and I encourage people to go in and take a look at it. It's now got its own full section in the code.
Catherine, you just led us into our next question. You were talking about steep slopes.
Yeah.
One of the questions is how will building on steep slopes be managed?
So, well, the same way it is now, we have a geologic hazard overlay zone that applies to anything that is, make it simple, 12% grade or greater, which is most of the stuff that we have left to build on. First thing right off the bat, it requires a report from a geotechnical engineer. That has to have been issued within the last 5 years, very specific credentials that that person has to have. And then that any cut and fill, any development on that lot follow the recommendations of the engineer. So that's our biggest safeguard there to people doing crazy things. We've also just in the last handful of years, meaning last 10 or so, added some protection. You can no longer clear cut a lot on a steep slope. So limit of 25% of the canopy that can be removed in any year. That doesn't apply to smaller, say, young alders, but um, does protect us from some, I'm going to build on this lot. So step one, cut all the trees. So we have a couple things in place now that we haven't always had. Um, One of the things that might actually help with the multi-unit types of buildings, as Lauren mentioned now, pretty hard not to just build a big box.
Yeah.
We require a duplex, triplex, quadplex. We require that they all be under the same roof. The new definitions would not require that. A duplex now, by definition, could be detached. So if you were on a steep slope, you could consider the slope, and maybe you have two smaller footprints rather than one big box, which gives people a little more flexibility on a steep slope.
Thank you for that. Let's do one more here before we open it up to the floor here. This question is, where did setback numbers come from?
That's a really good question. I don't want to sound facetious, but in some cases, these numbers, they kind of came out of some discussion by committee way back when, and everybody says, yep, that sounds good, and they were adopted, and they're not really questioned much after that. A lot of our code came from some language that was proposed on the state level for smaller cities. They sort of said, hey, small cities, you need to put some of this stuff in writing. It needs to be consistent, and people need to be able to find it. There was one round of that in the 70s. We did it again in the early 90s. Most of our neighbors adopted the same setback rules. They may have diverged over the years, but a lot of them came from that same sort of statewide, here's a good draft. This is something for you to start with. We've seen some successful variance requests where people have made a good case to the planning commission saying this is why this setback doesn't make sense in this case. Kind of showing that there is some flexibility there if you're looking case by case. Some of it came from fire. So the 5-yard side yard setbacks to allow room for personnel and equipment to move between two buildings. The front yard setback, the 20 feet from the street. And when I say street, I don't mean pavement. I mean from the city street right away. So sometimes that can be quite a distance from the pavement. Not quite sure. Yeah, but so a little bit from a lot of different places, and they haven't been scrutinized too closely in the last 30 some years.
Thank you. We will go ahead and open the floor for questions. If you could please raise your hand and try to make room for all that are interested in asking questions, that would be greatly appreciated. If we have no questions, I do have a few more that have been collected from the July 14th meeting. Well, I'm going to give you a question while some folks on the call can think of some questions. This is a good one. It will lead into our conversation for tomorrow, which is going to be surrounding ADUs and ADU guidelines. And the question is, can ADUs have design standards or be required to look like the main house? And then we do have a question from the audience after you answer that.
I think we would all like to see that happen. I think we have a more cohesive community if the designs for the two different separate buildings on the same parcel look the same. Unfortunately, there's nothing in any of the ordinances that requires that. So it is possible that the ADU might look totally different.
And the state has kind of set some basic rules. Bobby hit on this a little bit before. If we impose design standards on things in the single dwelling, in the R1 single dwelling unit zone or ADUs, we open kind of a whole can of worms. We can't pick and choose. We either say we're going to do this, if we wanted, for example, to do it for duplexes, then we have to do it for single dwelling units. If we want to do it for ADUs, then we also sort of start dictating what the original home looks like, because I don't
Mhm.
know if you would want an ADU on my property to mimic the primary structure. You'd probably want it to look nicer. Uh, so it's a tough thing to do, particularly if it drives up the cost, which it would. It would prohibit anything prefabricated, a small manufactured home. Uh, you basically have to have an architect then draw a plan for something that matched the look and feel of the primary structure. Some ways around that. Other cities have done this. Bobby and I met with a couple of them where they provide some building plans for ADUs, provide them free of charge. They've already been vetted by the local planning department, so it streamlines the permitting process. It eliminates, covering your ears, the need for an architect.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but they were handpicked because they're nice looking.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's one way that we might make it easier for people to do something that doesn't look like a tough shed. Sorry to pick on tough shed.
Mhm.
Uh, but to be clear, there are minimum building standards that have to be met, even if design standards are not
Mhm.
for an ADU. We are not talking about trailers on wheels. We're not talking about old mobile homes. We're not talking about people living in an RV. It has to meet the small home specialty code, which is basically
Mhm.
the what we used to call the uniform building
Mhm.
code. Um, so they have to be real houses. They just don't have to be designed by an architect.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I've just offhand seen some pictures of some of them, and actually they're quite nice.
Yeah,
They're designed such that they would fit in with the Pacific Northwest style. So they can actually be beneficial in terms of visual characteristics as well as time to permit.
yeah. And
Yeah.
we
Mhm.
had looked at City of Ashland. We collected quite a few of them that they were offering, and they borrowed from some other neighboring
Mhm.
cities, but it's all very kind of a Pacific Northwest look and feel, and intended for our climate, and more
Yeah.
geared towards wind and rain than
Well, thank you for taking that question. We've got Lauren Castellino with her hand up. Go ahead, Lauren.
Hi. So I guess I have a bunch of questions, but I'll ask one and then hopefully other people will ask and then if there's time you come back to me, but just to know that I have a bunch of questions here.
be disappointed if you didn't, Lauren.
The funny thing is, Catherine, my friends know me as someone who asks questions, so it's not just you that are having this experience. But at any rate, I was reading over some of Cascadia Partners material, and I'm very glad that you're all looking at the science standards. And Cascadia, they have a statement basically that unless carefully calibrated, the proposed code changes will change the character. And so I'm looking to see careful calibration. And this town feels small enough to me that one could actually like a look at areas and go, okay, this is what the code would allow in this spot right here. And if that happened, would that be desirable? So, for instance, and I was surprised to learn that at least, one planning commission member didn't even realize where like the R3 zone was. So it's kind of like, wait a minute, you all are making decisions about what's going on in these zones without potentially knowing actually where those zones are and then being able to visualize what would happen in that area if the code changes went into effect. But let me just take one example. So I live on West 2nd, right near the state park. The lot closest to the state park could certainly be built on, and I haven't tried to look into what, but I'm guessing there could probably be like 8 24-foot high units there. Maybe I'm overestimating, I don't
You're
know.
way overestimating, but there
Okay,
is some development potential. It basically used to be the garage for what's for your house.
exactly, I know. So what would be able to be built there, Catherine?
Oh, all right. Don't make me do math here well, so it's a 50 by 100 R3 lot. I'd be happy to work it out. We've kind of played with the numbers on your lot, and the answer there was that there was, I think you got another couple of square feet in lot coverage, certainly not another unit. Um, problem again with that, if you're going 30 feet high, you're increasing your side yard setbacks to 10 feet. So you're taking a kind of chunk out of the width of the lot. I'm not going to say something where I'll then be misquoted.
Yeah.
But it's not 8. And yes, 30 feet is a possibility, but if you go up, you come in. Um,
So that would be obviously most negatively impactful on me, but I think it would be terribly impactful on the state park, where a lot of tourists, a lot of residents spend time, because now you look and you have this like open view, and then it would be totally blocked off. Some of the trees, no doubt, the branches would have to be cut down. And a lot of people walk down Second Street and a lot of people drive down Second Street as their access to the state park. So, in my mind, like so many people will be negatively affected just by potentially that one building cluster, whatever it would prove to be. And that's the calibration that
Lord, can I point something out though, and I don't want to make you lose sleep. Under our current code, let's see, that's R3, 40% of that lot could be covered by a 30-foot tall structure. Now, what would differ is the number of units in there, but the structure itself, the 30 feet is there right now.
I know
That
that, but
that's not changing. So in terms of view and cutting of trees, um, like I say, I don't want to make people lose sleep, but that's not really what's being proposed to be changed. It comes down to how many units could be within that
well, and how much of the lot
30-foot
could
tall
be covered,
structure.
and how much of the lot could be covered, and how close the building could be to the street, and how close the building could be, I don't know, to the state park and to my property. So, I mean, that does all of that increase the visual bulk and loss of greenery and general impact.
So on the lot coverage, it would yes, that's true. Currently, somebody could cover 40% of that lot for whatever was built there. That could increase to 50% if somebody was building 2 units. So if they were building to a higher density, but if it were still just a single dwelling unit, and I really, I guess the building height is the thing I guess I really want to make clear that the 30 feet is there now. It's always been there. The house that comes to mind, and I got called out for calling out houses the other day. But there's one that went in on Ocean View Drive at 6th Street it went in a couple years ago, and it's 29 feet, 11 and 5/8 inches. And the neighbors were pretty unhappy because what had been there before was an older manufactured home. Um, so, when I looking at, I'm not saying that I don't understand people's concerns, but that concern is there right now. Could happen under our current code.
Well, it's exacerbated by the proposed changes. Yes, that could happen. And I mean, I'm not seeing anyone else's hand up, so if I can keep talking. Um, I mean, I do like have the question altogether is like, how are these code changes protecting the character of Yachats? Like, how do you see that as part of these code changes? And included with that is, why do we have 30-foot height limits? But I don't want to mostly focus on the 30-foot height because I know that's what's existent. It's like, how do these proposed code changes protect the character of Yachats?
I'm not going to field that one because my role today is as planner, and I don't even get a vote in this. Um, I could have the conversation as private citizen, but I don't know if that's appropriate. Um, so really, my role is just kind of to make sure people understand what we have now, what we're proposing to be a little different, and um, maybe that's a good question for uh, commission and council at at the public hearings.
Well,
Because I
I'm
don't know if
concerned that
Lauren, as one member of a commission, even necessarily wants to expound on that.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to remember that what is character of the community is different to everybody. Sometimes that's physical structure, sometimes that's the sentiment and the feeling and the people. It's different for everybody. Character is how people feel it is different from for everybody, I would say. So I think you're right, Catherine. That is a good question for the commission as a whole or the council as a whole.
So, but given what you just said, Bobby, are you saying like, well, we can't really do code that's going to preserve the character because it's different from for everyone, or how would you then be considering the character and the code?
Well, I part of the character I consider for Yahats is the people who are in it and the people who are living in it and the people who are working in the community and the people who are the and people who have grown up here. I don't think that the code per se has anything to do with that except for trying to allow for more housing availability. Um, I think that Catherine, we should go on to another question, and or we should see if anybody else has a question in the room here. So maybe Lauren, another question.
Yeah, thanks.
Mhm.
I mean, Bobby, when I hear the response you just made, it's like, um, I think a lot of people in town are not very happy with these proposed code changes. And I agree the character of the town definitely has to do with people, without question. It's a big part of it. But I think also part of the character is, there's a lot of one-story buildings in this town, and that creates a kind of felt sense just in one's body in relationship to, structure, and then also in terms of views and sun and all manner of things. And, greater density of people tends to lead to less good relations between people. And so I don't know that that would happen, but I can imagine it being hard to be neighbors if someone built a 30-foot structure, that totally, you know, created stormwater problems for someone next to them or totally blocked their view. I mean, I have a friend who, they're not able to recover from the way their view was kind of needlessly blocked. So, I I know that initially you all were saying the main things were you wanted to get affordable housing and workforce housing and preserve the character yachts. And it isn't workforce housing and it isn't affordable housing. Possibly some of these code changes would make housing somewhat more affordable, but immediately lot prices go up. A home with an ADU, that's going to be more costly to buy. It seems like we're trying to maybe set up a situation where people can rent. Um, but when I looked at like how do you preserve the character of a town, you preserve some of the older buildings, you make sure new buildings are on the same kind of scale, you make sure the same kind of materials are used. And so like that's some of what I would be yearning for with these design standards if we're looking at character, because architecture is one element of character in this town. Um, and
So
then so
maybe I can just jump in a little bit on that because now, um, so one of the things that the state is really coming down hard on are any parts of the code that are not considered clear and objective. So having a standard that says maintain the look and feel or the character or I don't even know how you would speak to building materials that could or could not be used because they're sort of all over the place. But a lot of the revisions that you'll see in in the proposed draft come down to that, where the state has said this isn't clear and objective. Like some person or group of people have to decide if this does fit the character of Yahats. Whereas the goal is that if four different people come into my office with four different sets of drawings, they're all going to be measured by the same checklist, where I can say, this is okay, this is not okay. But I shouldn't be saying, well, that doesn't really fit the look and feel, or it doesn't feel like doesn't feel Yahishan. So we have to be very careful with that. And we're either then all in, where absolutely everybody has to meet that same standard, or not at all. So I don't know if just from a practical standpoint that could be done. I don't know that that's what we would want to do because there is some quirkiness even to our oldest part of town. Not everything looks alike. It's, not all the same architecture, not all the same materials. So we have to be a little careful there.
I'd like to just add in there that the design standards in many regards is intended, as I see them, to try and again, I go back to the word articulate, but the try to keep the bulk 40-foot coverage or 40% coverage down so that you don't get that with multiple family structures. In other words, the design standards, provide some way of breaking that up. And the standards that are being proposed are very objective.
Yeah, where
The
I could,
difficulty comes from standards that are subjective. And having been involved with many communities over my career, many of them with design review boards and things like that, what I'm hearing you, Lauren, suggest is that maybe we could evaluate something from an aesthetic standard of limiting things, and design review boards are empowered with that being in mind, but our code is definitely the objective standards. We have to meet these objective standards, and that's what the Oregon Revised Statutes is aiming at here. Am I correct?
yeah, and maybe, but
Yeah.
Lauren, so for example, Quiet Water has a design review committee.
Yes.
That the HOA can enforce those guidelines, the city cannot. But as a part of a building permit review process, it goes to the design review committee and they impose their own rules on it. But the city, we don't have similar sorts of things, and boy, they would have to be extremely carefully written before they would meet the clear and objective standard.
We have another question here from Sue May. Go ahead, Sue.
First, that I even am saying anything about design standards, I want to preface that with I don't want any optional changes. I want us to be the 1,000 people, not the 2,500. These aren't required. With that being said, one of the things that I've listened to and heard going back to your initial Zoom meeting with Cascadia Partners was we have these kind of buildings, facilities and stuff anyway. We have, let me go back, I'm probably thinking more of ADUs, but we have them anyway. You just don't see them. So my thought is, why would we have standalone ADUs in the residential area? Why don't we have just attached ADUs, the ones you don't see? Enclose my garage, put something into my spare room, not have design standards. You don't have to worry about a design standard if you put it into an existing building that's already on your property. I don't want ADUs. This is not a suggestion to change my feeling about it, but we're talking about design. And one of the things that I really think is going to be ugly is to have my little house out here that looks like a cabin from the 60s. I can't be, except building something scratch build, I could not put an ADU out here of anything that comes from a factory. They'll never match. But I could put at the top of Horizon Hill, there's another, don't talk about somebody's houses. There's a 600 square foot small house right up at the water tower. It is 600 square feet, which is within your ADU standards, and it's long and narrow. My house is long and narrow one way, my garage is long and narrow the other way. And if I stuck that 600-foot ADU on my property and I have plenty of room and could do it with no problem, I would look like a trailer park. You would turn Horizon Hill and you'd go, oh my gosh, look at that. They've got a small trailer park there because my garage would look like one, my house looks like one, and now this ADU looks like one. I, Catherine, shake your head because you know what I'm talking about. I can put in that other long thing with my
Oh,
garage
you
and with
want
my
me to
stuff,
do that? No, I'm
and
listening
it
to you.
would
And that,
look like a trailer park.
so,
If
so
I
what?
had to have one, I would certainly think that doing it secretly without it being secret would be more appealing in my neighborhood than having some weird, strange building put out there. Um, you can go all over town. I can point to them all over town where all these ADUs are that you can't see. In big houses, on Ocean Drive, on all kinds of places. Everybody has little hidden apartments. So
So
keep
maybe
them
Sue, I
hidden.
can clarify
Hidden.
a little bit on what I'm just on the language here, because this is a totally legitimate conversation to be having. Right now, we're allowing for multiple kinds, we're proposing multiple kinds of ADUs. One is a detached ADU, and that would be like what you're talking about, where maybe a detached garage is converted to living space, or a small manufactured home is brought in. The other is what we'd call an internal conversion, where you don't change, there's no exterior modification to the existing home, but a second unit is added inside the existing four walls. Um,
I
what I
guess that's
don't
what I'm referring to is those
Right.
kinds of.
And so an internal conversion hopefully would not be an illegal one, because that scares me, because then maybe people are doing odd things with converting attic space into sleeping area without meeting current fire code. We sure don't want to be encouraging that. So maybe just as a matter of terminology, if we were talking about a detached ADU versus an internal conversion, as opposed to an illegal one, one of the things that is being proposed would be a legal internal conversion, where a single dwelling is converted into two, but without any exterior modification. So that's one thing you might bring to the planning commission and the council, is that what I'm hearing is, I don't like them in any fashion, but I hate the internal conversions less because there's no exterior modification. And that's a totally valid conversation to be having.
Did you want to follow up on that at all, Sue?
Um, not, not. I guess the only other thing I would say is, in terms of design, that I think that in the residential areas there should be we have a house and we have some kind of detached unit, and I think that should be the end of the sentence. So if you want to have extra living space, then you have that in your whatever your detached unit is. So I have a detached garage. So I shouldn't be able to put another detached unit on my property. That is the ADU. And it has to be detached because I live in a 1960s house that has a detached garage. So if I wanted to do an ADU in my property, the only way I should be able to do it is to convert my garage. I give up my garage. But you don't have the effect of house, garage, another building. It's like if you put 28 sheds out in your yard, it begins to look like, sorry, Bobby, a country farmhouse where you have outbuildings upon outbuildings upon outbuildings. I came from outbuildings. Every time you wanted something else covered, what did you do? You built yourself another outbuilding. You whipped a wing on that barn side, or you added another garage cover. And
So,
that's
Sue,
what.
if I can jump in again, one of the criticisms that um, I've heard about that thinking, for some people, their detached garage is the way they're meeting their off-street parking requirement. So if you take that garage offline as parking, where's that parking gonna go?
Where's the
Some
ADU going to go, Catherine? If they don't have enough room,
Well,
then
then they're
that
not
means
building an ADU. And what I'm
Well, then
hearing
that
is you're
doesn't
sort of
make
saying,
sense.
well, I'm going to go ahead and do that, but no questions asked and it's sort of illegal. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid. So if you can't meet the parking requirements, if you take that garage offline for parking purposes, then you're not building an ADU. I mean, it's that simple. But then if you say, well, if I convert that, I shouldn't be able to have another structure. Well, I don't know if we want to say, I don't know if we want to say that if we're then eliminating parking when on the other hand, we're saying, well, you now need additional parking because you've added an additional unit. So we just have to be real careful about,
Well, let's put it this way. I want to say that.
okay, fair
I
enough.
want to say that I
Fair
don't
enough.
want three detached buildings on my little property over here in my residential area because my property is starting to look like a farm. Building upon build and there can be some real ugly ADU pulled in here just plain because it has to look like my house. I have no articulation. It was built in the 60s. It's long and lean and ugly. So there you go. That's it. We're beating a dead horse here.
Okay, we're getting to be 3:51, so just being respectful of everybody's time. Again, 10 minutes left here. Lauren, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, if no one else is going to put theirs up. So I am wondering if you're aware that the 1,000 square foot for ADUs that's currently proposed is not in compliance with Lincoln County.
In what sense?
Apparently, they have a 900 square foot maximum allowance for.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the Lincoln County Code, that is the code that the unincorporated parts of Lincoln County are
Ah,
subject to.
so the urban
So
growth boundary is outside of that.
yes, so that has no, they have different setback requirements. They have different minimum lot sizes, much larger because because they have no sewer. So we cover all the same topics, but we don't have all the same answers to the same questions.
Got it.
So
Okay,
we're all
that's
subject to
helpful.
the building codes, but we're not all subject to the same, in our case, the municipal code.
Okay, that's helpful. And then, because I thought part of a big motivator, perhaps the primary motivator, was to try and make for housing that would be more possible for people to rent in this case with an ADU, I assume. Um, Smaller ADUs actually make for more affordable housing than larger ADUs. So it kind of seems like by allowing such a large ADU size, you're going against the attempt to make it more affordable.
And I think that's something you're going to hear. That's another thing that's on that list of things that I think you'll hear quite a bit of discussion about in the public hearings. The other thing, I just look at it, I'm not sure the math works. I'll take an existing 75 by 100 R1 lot. We don't have many of them, but that's the current standard. So anything that's been platted in the last, 30 years maybe. Um, what's being proposed is that if you were to add an ADU, you get an extra 10% lot coverage. So most people they've already maxed out their lot coverage when they built the primary residence. Even if we allow that extra 10%, gives them another 750 square feet in lot coverage. They couldn't hit that 1,000 square feet anyway. So that might not even be a practical number to be considering. Um, just from the standpoint of, crunching numbers on a site plan. But I think you'll hear a lot about that. Notice that a lot of communities have now added a minimum square footage of 201 square feet because under 200 square feet, often a structural permit is not required. So the thinking there is, ooh, let's not have people who built this 200 square foot outbuilding without a structural permit now be converting that into living space. So by setting that minimum at 201, we're sort of ensuring that anything that people are modifying into living space has been properly permitted from the beginning. So I think there's still a lot of discussion to have on that.
Well,
And I've heard that a lot.
that would be the carefully calibrated discussion that I'm hoping
Yes.
for. And it always makes me uncomfortable to say, well, not that many people could do that, or probably there's not that many places that could do that. If it's something that we don't want done, I would prefer code that was written so that it wouldn't be a possibility for it to be done. But that's just a comment. The last question I'll ask is, have the feedback and the questions that came out of the community engagement session ever been discussed in the planning commission meetings?
I can jump in.
Not,
They were
not a,
attached. No, they were attached in the I think it was the July 21st meeting. If I'm just pulling, I think that's what it was. It was that regular session right after the July 14th event. They were attached to that agenda or meeting materials. They were not discussed, and they have been utilized for the Zoom session series. They were part of the meeting materials, though, so all of our planning commission members do review them and read them and have had the opportunity to sit with them.
Well, I guess just a comment on that is that it's kind of disturbing to me to see the planning commission time after time doing a line by line review when I haven't seen a discussion that says, oh, we got this feedback from the community, so what do we think about it? And does it affect how we want to look at the code? And might we want to pause the line by line review to actually get clearer on what our vision is, what the objectives are, and how the code will actually enact that, rather than like, okay, the code says this, the code says that. It doesn't make it feel like the community input is being related with. And
Lauren, I think that you'll see that that's the conversation that's going to be coming soon. The line by line is really important for the Planning Commission to really get a good understanding of each piece of the code. As I know you're well aware that we just in the last couple months got this handed over from Cascadia Partners. You know, they've drafted this and created the code concepts, and now it's been in the commission's hands. Yes, we've received presentations and information from the Cascadia partners throughout the time period that they've been working on this, but the Planning Commission has just really been sitting down with this line by line and really understanding the code. Now they're taking those things and are about to have these types of conversations that you're suggesting and hoping for. I think you're going to see that happen, but it's just all in process.
well,
Catherine,
I
or
think,
Lauren,
I
do you have
think we're
anything to add to that?
I'm certainly
Catherine or
looking
Lauren?
forward to that.
I think
Certainly looking forward
Lauren
to that.
Dickinson
yeah,
had
we
a
got
comment.
two Laurens.
To Lauren, but Lauren Dickinson had a comment.
I think our next working session, which is an extra working session, is really when we're going to begin to start talking about the things that you have concerns about. The Planning Commission felt it was very important for us to fully understand all of the written proposed items before we even began to address the other concerns or changes to it. So we finished our written review of all the written documentation during the last working session. So this coming, what is it? Not this coming Tuesday, but or Monday.
I just show up when
Yeah, we have
August
a
17th.
upcoming working session. So that's when they're going to start on this.
and Lauren Castellino, that is the list that has sort of been being built during the course of this line by line review. When the discussion
Yeah.
starts getting interesting, it's like, okay, set that aside, we'll get through the line by line review. But there's a pretty clear bunch of topics
Yeah.
that are going to get a lot of attention here in the coming weeks. Where there's clearly not consensus on the part of the Planning Commission.
Okay, we have one more minute. I see Sue's hand up. We'll hear from you quickly, then we'll wrap it up. Go for it, Sue.
Should ever take time to discuss the optional versus not optional, and the fact that we are not required to make any of these changes. We are a community of 1,000, not 2,500. That conversation is not coming up, and the answers that I'm getting are totally not reasonable.
Well, Sue, I think that's the first on the list to talk about is exactly that on the 17th.
I'll be there to listen.
Okay.
Awesome.
But that it literally is the first thing to talk about on the 17th. So I am going to wrap us up. We're at 3:59. Thank you very much, Catherine and Lauren, for being able to field those questions. Lauren and Sue for providing questions and material for us to talk about today. And members who part of the community that joined the July 14th meeting and provided some of the questions that we used today as well. I do want to remind everybody that tomorrow at 3 p.m. we will be continuing this conversation through our Zoom series, and the subject is ADUs and the guidelines that we're looking to create to accompany those ADUs if they are to make it through the code process. Again, thank you very much. We'll see you all tomorrow, August 7th at 3 p.m. right here on Zoom. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.